Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Tuesday, the 24th of May. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. As of now, there is still no breakthrough in coalition talks aimed at expanding the coalition. Representatives of Yisrael Beitenu and the Likud met once again today with officials from the Finance Ministry in a bid to iron out differences. Officials say that while the deal is likely to be sealed in the coming days, if not hours, the sides have yet to resolve Yisrael Beitenu's demand for pension reform, which would ensure all senior Israeli citizens a minimum monthly state pension. The reform had previously been understood as applying primarily to Russian immigrants, many of whom had arrived in the country without significant savings. Meanwhile, the Jewish Home Party also weighed in on the coalition expansion with a demand of its own. The faction said it will only accept Yisrael Beitenu's joining the government on the condition that steps be taken to better brief members of the Security Cabinet on military matters, including the appointment of the Security Cabinet's own military secretary. Against the backdrop of these political developments, the Knesset plenum convened for its summer session last night. During his opening address Monday, Prime Minister Netanyahu stated that he would continue efforts to broaden the government. Hinting at opposition chairman Isaac Herzog, Netanyahu repeated that the door remains open to anyone who wanted to provide support for the benefit of the state. For his part, Herzog, who took the podium after the Prime Minister, said it was Netanyahu himself who had slammed the door not only on coalition talks, but also in the face of international diplomatic relations with European, American and regional leaders. Herzog added that Netanyahu had chosen instead to become a prisoner of an extremist and dangerous political group. Joining me now in the studio to make sense of this political horse trading is IBA's political correspondent, Kalev Ben-David. Kalev, welcome.
Hello.
Kalev, we'd all imagined that by now the coalition agreement would be a done deal. What's taking so long?
Alone, it's the old Israeli game. Nobody wants to be the friar. Nobody wants to be the sucker. Kahlon and Bennett woke up to the fact that Lieberman is coming into the cabinet at a higher cabinet post than they have, despite the fact that he's bringing a party that's smaller than their parties. So suddenly now they're making their own demands, trying to look good to their constituencies. Now, these are serious demands here that they're making. They are some legitimate, but of course, the timing of the demands, just doing it now, they could have brought these up at a sooner date. But I have to say, at the end of the day, maybe even at the end of the day, at the end of this day, that there will be some kind of deal. They have no reason to block it. Kahlon wants to see the government widened. That will help him on budgetary issues when they come to the Knesset. And of course, Bennett has been agitating for the replacement of Ya'alon as defense minister by Lieberman. So he too will come to some kind of agreement with the prime minister.
So assuming that Lieberman won't pass up on the opportunity to be defense minister over a question of pensions reform, when can we expect to see him being sworn in by the Knesset?
Most likely at the beginning of next week, because it's actually already past the deadline by which the Knesset can be notified 24 hours before, and it's not meeting at the end of the week. So it's likely this is going to be at the beginning, maybe right at the beginning of next week. In the meantime, Prime Minister Netanyahu will continue to hold the defense ministry post as he holds so many other cabinets. He's the foreign minister, he's the economy minister, he's almost a cabinet all his own right now.
Well, we're expecting the formal submission of the State Controller's report right now, and it's reportedly highly critical of the Prime Minister. How much of a political problem is this for him?
I don't think it's at this stage a serious problem. Remember, there have been previous State Controller reports very critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu, the whole issue with the investigation involving that with his household expenses that also involves his wife Sarah. I think anything short of either police recommendation for prosecution or an actual indictment will not pose any serious problem for the Prime Minister. Let's remember, this is a government that is now taking in a defense minister who has himself been the subject of many investigations over the years. So I don't think right now it's a political problem for the Prime Minister.
Kalev, thank you. At this hour, State Controller Joseph Shapira is set to formally submit his annual report to Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein with a chapter concerning double billing allegations against Prime Minister Netanyahu from his time as finance minister between 2003 and 2005. A statement released by Netanyahu's office said that for years the Prime Minister and his wife Sarah have been subjected to probes that have come up empty. IBA's Margot Dudkevich reports.
The report raises allegations concerning Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's expenditures. During the period he served as finance minister. He is suspected of double billing, diverting funds and failing to clarify accounting with the El Al national carrier regarding his and his family's trips abroad. Former State Controller Michael Lindenstrauss initially began drafting a report on the affair more than 5 years ago, but it was never released. It is unclear whether the 10-year statute of limitations will prevent the reopening of the case, dubbed Bibi Tours in the Hebrew press. According to local media, the allegations are currently being examined by the Justice Ministry, including teams from the Jerusalem District Prosecutor's Office, as well as police from the National Fraud Squad. A statement released by Shapiro's office ahead of the publishing of the report noted evidence supporting criminal suspicions are not included in the report, so as to avoid obstructing the ongoing investigation. In the report, Shapiro calls Netanyahu's actions very serious. Trips by Netanyahu and his family that were funded by external sources when he was finance minister deviated from the applicable rules and could create the impression of receiving benefits, the statement said. Police are considering reopening an investigation into Netanyahu's suspected financial misconduct. This is not the first report that has examined the Prime Minister's activities. Last year's report accused Netanyahu and his family of excessive spending at the public's expense, after it was found they had exceeded the annual budget allowance on food, cosmetics, clothing and cleaning at the official Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem and their private home in Caesarea. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
In related developments, many of Israel's leading political and academic figures gathered this morning in the capital to take part in the annual Eli Horowitz conference, previously the Caesarea conference hosted by the Israel Democracy Institute. IBA's Kalev Ben-David was at the event and asked IDI president and former Kadima MK Yochanan Plesner about the effective dismissal of Moshe Ya'alon as defense minister and its implications.
It's perfectly legitimate for the Prime Minister to appoint and fire and hire ministers in his cabinet and government. However, the reason why we thought this is a unique case is because we cannot disregard the context. Over the past half year or so, the defense minister was the symbol of fighting to preserve the IDF's spirit as a moral fighting force that fights terror while preserving Israel's compliance with humanistic values. And we thought that inasmuch as his impeachment is related to his fight for defending Israel's democratic values, we thought that this is a bad message that comes out, and we wanted to point it out.
How do you respond to those who say that it was within the democratic right of the Prime Minister to choose his defense minister, and that criticism such as yours reflects a more elite, perhaps left-of-center opinion?
Of course, it's perfectly legitimate for the Prime Minister to bring in new coalition members, but democracy is a lot more about just majority rule and majority decides everything. Democracy is first and foremost about values, about protecting the values of individuals, human rights, rights of minorities, procedures, and it's not about the majority rules. The majority can decide everything. And in this respect, we thought that Mr. Ya'alon's protection of those values merited our intervention in the public discourse.
The IDI released a poll today in connection with the conference showing that a majority of Israelis believe in varying degrees that the government is corrupt. How accurate do you think the public's perception of that corruption is, and what is the possible effect of that cynicism about government?
I think that the public perception of corruption is more severe than the problem itself. There are islands of corruption, there are problems of corruption, but the public's judgment is a lot more severe than what we assess the actual reality. Now, this has an effect in itself, because when people think that the system is corrupt. And people think that questions of promotions and hiring and firing in the public sector, for example, are done not based on merit, success, competence, or achievement, but rather on the basis of cronism and what we call protectia, then it provides the wrong signal. Smart people will either channel their talents to the private sector or not to develop their human capital, both of which are bad outcomes.
Your conference brings together leading members of the political sphere, of academia, of the economic world. What do you hope to achieve out of having this conference?
This conference is a result of over 1 year of preparation, where we prepared materials and sat together in groups of people from the private sector, public sector, academia, and others in order to develop recommendations how to make the public sector more effective. So we measured the effectiveness of public sectors throughout the world. We analyzed what might be the factors that might help Israel move up. We then took those recommendations and discussed them in discussion groups, and today we're circulating the findings, the recommendations, the ideas within this group of decision makers from all different sectors. And we hope that those ideas will trickle down to actual government decisions, bureaucratic decisions, next steps in terms of further recommendations that need to be honed or developed or articulated in future workshops that will ensue. So it's part of a process of making the government more effective and dealing with other fundamental problems, structural problems, if I may, in the social economic sphere.
And what are the main recommendations that you'll be bringing out of this conference?
I would say one thing is what not to do, which is not to increase in any way the extent of political appointments, which we've seen all over the world is a bad thing and produces negative outcomes. And at the same time, we're suggesting concrete mechanisms for improving merit-based both hiring and promotion mechanisms that will open up the public sector for talent both within the different agencies and from without the government.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is reportedly trying to arrange an Israeli-Palestinian peace summit in Cairo. The report surfaced just a week after the Egyptian president said in a televised address that he saw a real opportunity for Israel and the Palestinians to resume dialogue. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the time welcomed el-Sisi's statements. The Egyptian president intends to play the role of mediator in a three-way summit in Cairo, and Egyptian diplomats are contacting their Israeli and Palestinian counterparts in order to arrange a meeting between Netanyahu and Palestinian President Abbas in the Egyptian capital. Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah said he could not confirm reports that Abbas would participate in such a summit. Meanwhile, French Prime Minister Manuel Valls wrapped up his three-day visit to the region with a visit to Ramallah, where he met with his Palestinian counterpart Rami Hamdallah. The Palestinian premier accused Prime Minister Netanyahu of stalling. A spokesman for Hamdallah told reporters that the Palestinians rejected Netanyahu's call for direct talks in Paris, arguing that direct negotiations have proven fruitless in the past and there is no reason to repeat the same mistake. At a press conference in Jerusalem yesterday with his French counterpart, Netanyahu once again rejected the French initiative for an international peace summit in Paris next month, expressing a preference instead for direct negotiations with Abbas. Closer to home, a Palestinian teenager wielding a knife was shot dead by border police at the Ras Bidu checkpoint near Givon, north of Jerusalem yesterday. The girl was identified as 17-year-old Sausan Mansour. According to police, Mansour had attempted to stab a border policewoman stationed at the checkpoint before she was shot dead. No Israeli casualties were reported in the attack. The UN envoy for the Middle East peace process, Nikolai Mladenov, has welcomed Israel's decision to resume the delivery of cement to the Gaza Strip for private construction. All sides need to ensure the cement deliveries reach their intended beneficiaries and are used solely for civilian purposes, said a statement released by the envoy. Yesterday, some 90 truckloads of cement entered Gaza through the Kerem Shalom crossing after Israel lifted the 45-day ban. Last month, cement deliveries were partially suspended after it was determined that Hamas was using the supplies to construct cross-border tunnels instead of rebuilding houses destroyed during Operation Protective Edge. Moving to finance. Shares are up on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange and the shekel is mostly down against major currencies. Here are the figures. Now over to weather, and tomorrow should be partly cloudy with a small rise in temperatures, but will still be relatively chilly for the season. Here are the highs and lows for Israel and overseas. That's the end of today's show. Join us again tomorrow when Laura Cornfield will be back with the latest news from Israel. Until then, I'm Elon Aslan Levy, wishing you a good evening live from Jerusalem.